Copyright Agency is a remarkable organisation. It's a not-for-profit body set up in 1974. It's 42 years old this year. And in that time, it has been responsible for the disbursement of something like probably approaching, what, $2.5 billion back to Australian writers in this country in that time. So Copyright Agency is a very important body to keep alive the notion of Australian writing, and some of you may be well aware of the threat that is being posed to Australian writers through the changes proposed by the Productivity Commission, and before that the Law Reform Commission, around parallel importing, and certainly about the reduction in the ownership of copyright rights by authors. So we as a body, AATE, has been supporting Copyright Agency in the fight against these changes proposed by various governments, predominantly ones that are committed to global markets and global profits. Not too political. Okay, let's come back to Reading Australia. It had its genesis in around about 2012 with the Australian Society of Authors, who got together and wanted to create a list of some 200 titles, texts, Australian texts, which would reflect the best of the cultural writing output of Australians. And so the texts range from colonial times right through to the present. So far, I think the list is now expanded from the original 200 and is probably closer to 300 because the initial concept of just 200 texts and just those that are relevant to a span of Australian culture, it has been sort of extended to the present. Alongside this Reading Australia project, which is a live website, here it is now, I'll forget that person, it lists books and texts across an enormous range of genres. And if you look there are anthologies, biographies, children's books, drama, essays, graphic novels, and so on, and many others which cannot actually be categorised. They're put down under miscellany, if that's how you pronounce miscellany. So what we have a range of texts from historical, from biography, we have colonial texts, we have poetry, we've got drama, and we have everything in between, right down to things like Ned Kelly's Jerilderie letter, which is one of those significant texts, I suppose, and also the genesis, I would suggest, of Peter Carey's The True Story of the Kelly Gang, which was a unit written by Rosie over here in conjunction with Josie McKinnon. So I just wanted to take a little longer in this introduction just to give you the context of Reading Australia and why it is so important for Australian teachers that we support the teaching of Australian texts, not only for the reasons of our cultural heritage, but also to promote our own writers. If we can't look after our own writers, nobody else will. So it's a plea to support agencies like Copyright Agency Cultural Fund in its quest to support Australian writers. When we look at Reading Australia itself, AATE became involved end of 2012, and we began, Zoe Rodriguez, who is here today as the Cultural Fund Manager, approached AATE and asked, could we have teaching resources constructed for the Reading Australia site? Because the Reading Australia site as such around these books has Auslit trails, it has ABC Splash videos, it has significant essays written by significant Australian writers about other Australian writers, and it has now, as a result of this intervention, a large number of teaching resources. So far, I think we're up to about 125, would that be about right, teaching resources that have been constructed around these Australian texts. And of those 125, some 75 have been written for secondary audiences by AATE, and our partners have also been ALEA and initially Pecha as well. So that's a little bit about the background of Reading Australia as and I might add a free resource available to Australian teachers. And Rosie is actually going to take us through some of the units themselves and see how some of the techniques that are used in the Reading Australia teaching resources can be used across any genre or style of literature. I might add before I go on though that tomorrow we will be launching this wonderful book, which is called The Artful English Teacher, and it's the first AATE publication in quite some time. And I have to say as a plug that many of our writers of these units are also writers of the chapters of this book, The Artful English Teacher. So we've got real teachers writing for real teachers about real literature. So with that introduction, Rosie.
I think it's only fair that I confess that I'm not a real teacher, in that I'm not going through the everyday, business of being a school teacher, which in some ways is such an advantage when you're a curriculum writer. It's so much fun to have the headspace to do that work that quite often you don't have if you are in a school 5 days a week in several classes. I also want to acknowledge Rosie Kerin, who I write with, and I think we're great friends. We have a lot of fun together. She has an early childhood background. Mine is secondary, and we work together at uni. So I think I really love working with her because she brings a different headset to the whole idea of teaching and planning units. The other thing I wanted to do was acknowledge any other writers in the room. No, they're too busy writing, Phil. I'll get them later. And to thank Phil for inviting me to do some of the writing, which has been really satisfying. And I think it also highlights the importance of working collaboratively. We know from research that when you work with your colleagues, you will produce more effective planning and more effective assessment. And I think I just wouldn't want to do it on my own anymore. Because I love having colleagues to play with. Now, apologies that I didn't print off enough. I saw that the room capacity was 68 and I thought that would be a high level of arrogance on my part to print 70. But I'll give you my email address now, so if you want me to email a copy to you later today, I'll do that. And it's pretty simple. If my name is written there in front of you somewhere, it's rosie.kerin@gmail.com. And you're welcome to send me questions if something wasn't clear. Okay, look, I can't take you through the whole site. I think Phil's probably illustrated to you the richness of it and the size of it. And in fact, if you can have a look at the second page of the handout, I was quite staggered yesterday when I worked through the units. Last minute thing, I was wondering about all the literary theory that was in there. Now, I'm not going to work through each of those theories. Like Barbara said this morning, that's the last thing you want. This is going to be very practical. But what I will say is, what a fabulous resource for English teachers. Because not only are those theories described, explained, but they're also put into action in assessment and in activities. So what a rich resource for your faculty. And if you have to teach, if you're going to be teaching something about gendered reading or queer theory, but it's an American text, go into the Australian and see how it's used and then adapt. Okay? All right. So today we're going to have a look inside some resources. If I can get back to my PowerPoint. Okay. So I have to flick through these of Phil's. You can see how many of the texts are there. Okay. Look, I thought I'd start with some visual literacy. I've deliberately chosen aspects of the site, and for 125 texts, did you say, Phil? Yep. This is not going to be good coverage, and apparently Josie and I wrote 9. So I've just picked from my own units. I wouldn't do the disservice of any other writers to claim anything of theirs and then perhaps misinterpret what they wanted. So Josie and I looked at The Arrival. Hands up those of you who know The Arrival. Okay, who actually teaches with it? Okay, so it's such a rich text. For those of you who don't know, it's completely wordless. And I've actually I'll give you a plug of something to pair with it for senior classes. Yesterday I grabbed a book, I can't remember what it's called, it's that big, and it's by Richard Flanagan and Ben Quilty. They went off to Syria and they have written the most beautiful short story essay about people they met in Lebanon and in Greece and their journeys from Syria. So I was reading that and all I could think about was the arrival. And that's what you're going to find in this site, constant intertextuality, because you cannot study one text without constantly bringing in other texts. Now, those of you, a lot of people, I know in South Australia, intertextuality is kind of a new study in Year 11. So if you're one of those teachers, there are several units, and you'll see I've listed them there, that explore intertextuality. Okay. Look, one of the things that working with Josie made me very aware of, and you will see in a lot of the units, is about pre-reading. Not giving kids a novel or a play and then off you go. Primary school teachers would never do that. They'd make connections with kids. So a lot of the work that we do is trying to make connections with kids in their lives with a theme or with a technique, so that then when we get to the text, they know why they're reading it and they actually know what we think they should be looking for, because sometimes we assume they know. So one thing we're going to have a go at is I took a template from the Arrival unit, and that's there, so if you can share with someone else. Now, the idea of the unit of the template, can everyone see that on the front page? It's a scaffold for students. Now, one thing with visual literacy is quite often, we'll get kids to choose the features, but not necessarily go the next step and say, well, what's the point of that? What does that actually mean? So I'm going to give you a couple of images, and I'll give you about 30 seconds to talk with someone else about one of those boxes in your handout. So it might be the salience and composition. What kind of story is this telling? I also thought it's that time of day where you might have listened a lot. So now you can talk to each other. I'm going to interrupt you pretty fiercely. You're not going to get anything done. But just the notion, have a look at the scaffold, even if you talk about how you might use it with students. Okay, 30 seconds starts now. Okay, that was generous. That was about 45, 50 seconds, I think. I took that photo in Jaipur. If anyone has been there, the pink city, you can see that the walls there are pink. What a fabulous place. And I sometimes imagine there was someone taking a photo of me taking that photo. But I've seen that photo so many times, and for the first time today I noticed those 3 bricks. Did anyone else notice them? And this is the thing about visual literacy, is finding images where kids can go back and see more and more again. Now, The Lost Thing, who's used the film The Lost Thing? Okay, if you've never used The Lost Thing, make note now, it's a 15-minute film. Sean Tan actually won an Oscar for it, for the animation. I use it in film analysis workshops with teachers, and I don't know how many times I've watched it, but I keep using it because I keep seeing new things in it, and teachers love it, and it works really well with kids. So if you're teaching the Arrival, teach the lost thing as well. And in fact, I think you can't buy it anymore, so feel free to find it on YouTube.
Which one is that?
The lost thing.
Well, he lost so much money on that because people went directly to YouTube.
Hmm.
$2 million he lost on that film.
Okay. I did buy it. And I did learn the hard way. I bought it as in digital form through iTunes. And then when I went to show it through a data projector, it doesn't show. I learnt that the hard way. And I managed to get a second-hand copy. But you will also find the lost thing, the print text. There's also a unit on that in Reading Australia. So fabulous resources for doing an author study. And his website is brilliant. Okay, so would that template be useful in a different study? Wouldn't have to be for the lost thing, and I think you'll find this again and again with the resources. Okay. This one's very different. My son actually took this in Rome in January. He saw a couple arguing outside. I think he's inherited some of my curiosity. But again, so we're not going to do it, but what story is told here? Now you can see at the bottom of the template there are some things there that are peculiar to texts, because one thing if you're studying the arrival is the motifs that appear again and again throughout the text, and students have to be directed to look for them. There are other fabulous things in there that you'll find in the unit that I didn't know that Josie discovered. There's a picture of a young boy holding a newspaper on the street, and it's a visual allusion to a famous photograph from the Titanic sinking. Do you know the? And so there are so many other visual allusions in there to Ellis Island, to early Australian colonial art. So he does this again and again, and the same thing appears in The Lost Thing. So if you're interested in that kind of work, certainly that unit might be useful. So there are a number of things that you'll find in there. I haven't listed off every unit, and we're not going to go into the live site, but I just thought I'd bring a few things to your attention. So there's a lot in there on visual deconstruction and analysis. One of the things that we thought would be a great way to get kids engaged in a book is to start reading it, or start looking at it, or start viewing it, whatever your text may be, and get them to come up with 10 facts. What are 10 things they know for sure about the text that they have just read the first chapter of, or the first 5 minutes of a film? They might know it's set in Louisiana, they might know it's in the 1950s, but then to get them to write down 10 questions. What don't they know yet? And that leads them into the narrative frame. What do I need to know? What do I anticipate? And then come back to those 10 questions at the end, 10 facts, 10 questions, and now come up with 5 new facts and 5 new questions. Now, can you imagine what you could get with when kids collaborate and share those with each other? And so it's rather than you telling the kids the themes and they get to work on it. I use Bill Green's 3D model, which was designed for teaching literacy in a digital age, but it's fantastic for analysis. So if you're interested in having a new analytical tool for yourself or for kids, that's articulated back in there, as well as intertextuality. Who uses Go Back to Where You Came From? Okay, because it's on the syllabus in New South Wales, I think. And the rabbits, of course. Now, for every unit, there are 2 assessment tasks. So what's that, mate? 250 assessment tasks with rubrics. And they're all aligned to the Australian curriculum. And for Year 11 and 12, that's the senior curriculum. So, but very easily tweaked for each of the states according to your particular assessment board. Okay. Pecha Kucha. I was interested this morning. It hasn't gone mad in Adelaide just because Barbara mentioned it this morning, but Pecha Kucha is a fabulous thing. But I don't know about you, but if I was back in the classroom, the idea of sitting there while up to 30 kids did 3-minute speeches is enough to make me not go back, okay? It's very hard for all of the students and you. Pecha Kucha, what we did for this particular unit was to reduce it. so that they could only have 9 slides and they have to be timed for 15 seconds. Did I put minutes there? No, seconds, exactly. And so kids have to keep up with it. And so as a collaborative task, it's really good because they have to keep each other to get their scripts down, to make them short, to make them concise. So if you want to learn about Pecha Kucha, one of the things that we've done, and Phil would know that I overwrite, you know, Phil would say 250 words and then I'd send back a mean 600. But one of the things about IT is that we've never assumed that anyone knows anything. So if you do know about it, you will just glaze over it and ignore it. But for people who've not used something before, another thing we did was hashtag reporting, where we were looking at The Red Shoe. Does anyone know that particular novel? I'd never read it before. I really loved it. And it's set around the Petrov affair. Now, probably not many of your Year 10s will know about the Petrov affair, although we did try to align it with the history curriculum. But what we did was we got kids to think about history, and so what they had to do is come up with 5 photos, each photo with 5 hashtags to tell the complete story of that historical event. So it's not an easy task, but it's an example of using IT to get kids to engage with the text and communicate concisely with each other. Okay. Now, Bush Studies, when that was on the list, I thought, I've never even read Bush Studies. Does anyone here know Bush Studies? Okay, it's quite often taught at uni. And at first I wasn't sure what to do because she uses a vernacular. What an incredible woman. In the 1890s, she married well, became very famous and wealthy, and kind of told lies throughout her life, but a fascinating character. And she wanted to answer back to the stories of the brave bush women and wanted to construct a completely different narrative. So if you're interested in critical literacy, Barbara Bainton is who you're looking for. So the other thing that I have to say is sometimes when we've had to write units on books that we don't know or we don't like, and I give a special mention here to Playing Beatty Bow. You know, it's a very long time since I've read Playing Beatty Bow, and it'll be a very long time before I ever read it again, I have to say. Some of the books were chosen as classic Australian texts, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best texts for your students in your context. Now, maybe they would work for your students if you are teaching in the rocks. But, you know, if you're teaching in remote Queensland, there's probably not a lot of connections. So one thing we did with that unit, and some of you might be interested in it, is we assumed that students would not read it, which we probably should assume for every text we teach. So what we did was we set it up saying, okay, some students will not read a text, so how do we get around that? So we did activities such as reducing chapters into tweets. So kids had to then compile the book as a series of tweets. We didn't assume, and kids were not penalised for not reading the text. Now, that doesn't mean I'm anti-reading the text, but I think as a realist, and because I think it's a tough text for some kids to get into, plus it was time travelling from 1975. Now, our kids would have to time travel back, but there's no help in the book for them to time travel back to that period of 1975. There were no smartphones, for instance. How on earth did anyone communicate in that book? They'd be wondering. So there are advantages in working with texts that are difficult. So the other thing we did with that is when we assumed that some students might not read it all was to give 2 assessment tasks. So students who did read it all actually got to choose. So there was some advantage in reading the whole text. So you'll see if you go and have a look at the Playing Beatty Bow section that there are 2 different assignments that kids can choose from. Okay? All right. Let's have a look at Kamala's critical writing pedagogy. I think we do a lot about critical reading. Does anyone here do critical writing? Because I'm a great believer that you can't actually understand it until you try it yourself. So we're going to have a bit of a go at some critical writing. Okay, so You can choose either of these things. You can choose for that to be a scene of romance, or a scene of horror, or a scene of contemplation. Can you write down, whichever of those three you chose, you can talk to someone if you want to, or just do it yourself. Can you write down 5 nouns and 5 verbs? And these are words that you would use to construct a representation, a written representation of that scene. And you're allowed 1 adjective. Anyone else with me and come up with corpse?
Just torso.
Torso, oh, better still. Now, isn't that the power of language? To have torso instead of corpse. It takes it to a whole different level. Okay, now one of the reasons I've asked you to do that is students need to know that the genre is constructed mostly through nouns and verbs. And you're only allowed 1 adjective because there should be few adjectives. If you look at good literature, people who have come to my writing classes will know this, the fewer adjectives you have, the better. And if you're reading a fabulous book at the moment, have a look how many adjectives there are. If it's pre-20th century, there may be quite a few adjectives, and adverbs. Adverbs are even fewer. And so it's to get kids to really think about specificity of the language so that they can carry meaning through nouns and verbs, and that is the thing that will allow them to read critically. What are the nouns? Is this an ogre or is it a man? Is it, whatever? Is it a torso or is it a body? Okay. All right. So the other way of thinking about this in terms of critically writing, and this is a quote from a critic of bush studies, and this gets into feminist studies as well, where he's describing the women in Barbara Bainton's stories as a victim, an agent or a witness. Now, if you go onto Wikipedia and read a little bit about Barbara Bainton, she was definitely an agent. She did not allow herself to be a victim. She went out and pursued whatever she needed to pursue. In fact, no one would publish her work in Australia, so she went to England, I guess on the expense of the latest man she picked up, and she found a publisher there. However, the women are positioned differently. Now, I've put a small extract on the 4th page, I think, of your handout. Again, you're going to have to share. 5 minutes? Okay. Now, you may be interested to know that the entire text is available free online at the Gutenberg Project. So if you're doing any Henry Lawson or Australian bush stories, and you want to have a feminist perspective, then think about... I have to say that that extract from the Chosen Vessel is very brutal, and you'd need to think carefully about which students used it. It's got a very grisly end. Okay, so if you look through there, see if you can determine places where the central character is an agent. Where is she in charge of what she's doing, and in which places is she a victim? Can everyone find at least a sample of one and the other? I love the bit where she uses her best man's voice in the bedroom. So there's some agency for her, but she's isolated. What about the husband's final comment at the end? Okay, so it's about exploring the complexity. The same character, not always a victim, not always the agent, and that forms the basis of an essay response. And these would be Year 12 students, because it's a pretty tough text. Okay. And the other thing to do with students would be to get them to do some more writing. Is this young girl, how might she be a victim? How could you construct her as a victim? How can you construct her as an agent or as a witness? So it's about exploring the topic visually, getting kids to write about real objects and then translating it into an analysis of the text. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of that one. So there's, in that unit, about Gothic literature and bush literature. So both are explored. Critical reading, 50-word challenges. You know, get the story down to 50 words. It's a little bit like PhD students having to do a 3-minute thesis. You can only do it if you really have mastery over the topic. So the other thing in there is about the landscape. Does anyone here study Australian landscape in texts? Because we've compiled a whole lot of trailers of films. And there's an activity in there where the students have to deconstruct the landscapes of all of those Australian films and then construct one for Barbara Bainton. There's stuff in there about video mashups and instructions and links to how to do video mashups if you've got students who you think would be able to do that well. Okay, now I've got about 2 minutes to go, I think. Infographics. Does anyone here use infographics? This is rather like having to reduce your thesis in 3 words. If you go online and look up literary infographics, you'll get all sorts of things. So this is young adult dystopias. This was prepared by a 14-year-old who was comparing, I mean, the gender thing is fascinating, isn't it? Mostly female. But then, I know it was a girl who did this. If it was a male, it might be completely different, or if it was an older collection. This one's my personal favourite, though. So he's gone through King Lear, and down the bottom is a death total. 5 stabbings, 2 hanged, 1 poisoned, and 2 with broken hearts. So it is a way of working with students. The software's there, links to the software and so on. And so the other thing I've supplied for you is a description of a task for looking for Alla brandy, which is another text I have to say I don't like very much. I know I break people's hearts when I say that, but rereading it, I was quite challenged. So what I did, and this is something that you might find useful, is I downloaded it as a whisper sync text. So if you go to Amazon and you buy an ebook, and that might be, $11.92 or something, and then if you add $4.53 or some other random number, you can have a whisper sync version. So what I was doing was going to work on the bus, reading it on my phone, and then when I got home, you press the headphone icon, and then it reads it to you. But because I was pressed for time, I got it to read it to me at 1.5 speed. It's good, it works. But what a great tool for kids. Okay. So that's just a bit of sampling of the kinds of things that are in the actual unit. I just thought it might be useful so that you could see when you go on, so the focus text is the arrival, for instance, then the front page is about the book, and make sure that you have a look at the critical essays and give them to your students. They're written by Australian authors critiquing and responding to the work of other Australian authors, and I think that's such a unique thing. So make sure you look at those, and some of them may serve as fabulous models for your senior students. And the awards, all of the other details are on the front. And then when you click on Teacher Resources, you'll see there are 4 tabs across the top. Initial response, so that's where all the pre-reading is. Close study and theory. And then significance as a text. Why is this text significant for Australia or internationally? What's the import of that particular text? And then an informed reaction. Now, the assessment tasks are either productive or receptive. Okay, so the infographic is a receptive task and also productive because it's doing both things. But if it's a creative writing response, for instance, that would be productive. Anyway, you'll find the assessment tasks on the final 2 tabs. Okay? All right, so how might you use it? I would definitely point early career teachers in its direction because they'll discover, how many different writers are there, Phil?
Writers of what?
Yeah.
Oh.
60?
Oh, no. 35?
35. So there's 35 different English teachers they can learn from who all approach text differently. So get them to go in there, have a look at the kinds of activities. If they're unsure about poetry, for instance, maybe in their prac they didn't teach any poetry units, so they're floundering, or maybe you are sick of the way you're teaching poetry, you want new approaches, go into the poetry units or the drama units. If you're a faculty leader, I would be asking people at a meeting to kick off, take turns. Someone come and tell me what's a great idea that you've got from one of the units. So there are lots of opportunities to use it for Australian text, but also beyond that. Now, quick plug for South Australia. Mortlake Library, this is where I work. Not as a librarian. I just go there to write sometimes, and I took my daughter in Year 12 there as well. Close supervision. But it's absolutely beautiful. It's up on North Terrace and it's just been voted one of the 4th most beautiful libraries in the world. So if you, and they do free tours. So when you're working up there, so if you need some quiet time, you go up and between all of those shelves there are tables and you just sit there and look out as people wander past. It's absolutely beautiful. So it's on North Terrace, so I'd recommend that you do that. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.